15. So this week, we celebrate Independence Day, the 4th of July, and often, maybe it's at parades or other events or ball games or whatever, there's often times of pledging allegiance to the flag or the Star-Spangled Banner, and it's a great time for our country to rally around and remember what Independence Day is all about. However, we understand that many people are just thankful for a day off work, and they don't really stop and give thought to what the 4th of July is all about, and the many lives that were lost trying to make our nation what it is. But it's good, I think, to pause and reflect and to think about that, and even as we at times pledge the allegiance to the flag, I think those are good things. However, this morning, I want us to do that concept of pledging our allegiance to Jesus Christ. Because sometimes we as God's people, we can go through the motions of church and living the Christian life and being a good person, and we don't lie, we don't cheat, we don't steal, we do all the right things, and we try to live a godly life. But sometimes we do all of that and we don't pause and reflect about, why am I doing that? What's my motive for the way I live my life? And so as we've been looking at this theme of rebooting, we need to at times pause and reboot our allegiance. And is Jesus Christ really first in our lives? We could go to several passages. We're not going to go to a lot today. We'll go to a couple, but we go to 2 Chronicles 7:14. If my people, which are called by my name, shall humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, right? God says, then I bless the nation, right? And he's not talking about the liberal, ungodly people in his world. He said, if my people would do this. We know Matthew 6:33, seek ye first as a priority the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added unto you. And we could go to many, many different verses, but I want to look at one man today, Peter. We know him well, but we're going to look at just a couple of verses that talk about Peter, who at one point in his life, probably when he was very young as a child, because he grew up knowing about the things of God. He grew up going to worship every week. No doubt as a child, he didn't say these words, but as a child, I'm sure he pledged his allegiance to God. No doubt he was a teenager like every other teenager, and probably struggled and strayed at times, and probably recommitted at some point. I need to really take this seriously. And then we know as a young man, some of his friends had said, we found the Messiah that we've been looking for. And he recommitted his life. And remember, Jesus said, I want you to give up fishing and follow me. And he said, I'm going to do it. And in essence, he said, I pledge my allegiance to Jesus Christ. I will follow you for the rest of my life. And then we find a time in his life when he was asked, will you repledge your allegiance to Jesus? And he said, I won't do it. And it broke his heart when he realized what he had done. And it should break my heart, it should break your heart when we look at times when we look at our lives and we say, at some point I've stopped pledging my allegiance to Jesus and I've pledged my allegiance to something else. And so we're looking at a couple passages in Mark, and then we're going to go to John chapter 21 and look at the final conclusion of what God did in Peter's life to bring him back to where he could say, no turning back. Let's pray. Father, we thank you today for this text, a couple of texts that we'll look at. And Lord, this whole concept of rebooting our allegiance to you, Lord, it's something we all need to look at from time to time. And I pray, Lord, if there's areas in our lives where we need to get things right with you, we would do it today. Let's not focus on anybody else, Lord, but may we all focus on self. We thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. So Mark 14, pick up there if you would, down in verse number 26, right after Jesus had done the Last Supper with his disciples. He was leaving there. He had instituted the Lord's Supper, And they're going out in the Garden of Gethsemane, where we're not going to look at the whole scene, but he goes there. Remember, he asked Peter and the guys to pray, and I'm going to go a little further. He prays and struggles and comes back and finds them asleep. It's in that context. It says this: "And when they had sung an hymn, they went out into the Mount of Olives. And Jesus saith unto them, All you shall be offended because of me this night. For it is written, I will smite the shepherd, and the sheep shall be scattered. But after that I am risen, I will go before you into Galilee. But Peter said unto him, Although all shall be offended, yet will not I." Peter, we see his promised allegiance, but in his promised allegiance to Jesus, we see a little bit of arrogance. If somebody ever said to you, "I think you might one day betray the Lord," and you said something like, "That will never happen," be careful. He that thinketh he standeth, right? Take heed lest he fall. And so the creator of the universe, the God of heaven, the one who knows all things, said to Peter and to the rest, all of you guys are going to stumble tonight, spiritually. All of you are going to turn your back on me tonight. The one who knows all things said that, and Peter said, that'll never happen. And he went a little further. He said, these guys might, not me. He was a little arrogant. I think he was trying to be confident. And in his confidence, he was a little more confident in himself. And you know how we overplay our confidence in self and we downplay our confidence in other people at the same time? And that was Peter. He's like, you know what, these guys might. But Lord, you have to know. And he didn't do this. He didn't put his hand on his heart and say, but I pledge my allegiance to you. He didn't do that. But in essence, that's what he was doing. I have pledged my allegiance. I will never turn my back on you. I don't care what anybody else does. If I'm the last man standing, I will not turn my back on you. And then Jesus said in verse 30, verse 30, Jesus said unto him, Verily I say unto you, that this day, even in this night, before the cock crow twice, you, Peter, you're going to deny me 3 times. And if the God of heaven who knows all things said that to you, after you just said, it'll never happen, he says, let me tell you, I know all things. It will happen to you 3 times tonight. You would think he would shut up and say, wow. But he didn't. He spake the more vehemently. If I should die with thee, I will not deny thee in any wise. Likewise also said they all. It was said, I'm not sure if it's a true story or not, but it was said there was a place, I guess, where these underground Christians were meeting at some point, and they weren't allowed to be meeting, weren't allowed to worship, and yet they gathered for worship. And then one day, some soldiers came in, found where they were hiding, came in with their guns blazing, and they said, listen, if you're a follower of Jesus Christ, stand up. And they said, we'll give you one chance. You can either walk out this door and deny him, or stand up and we're going to kill you. And a handful of people left. And when they gave the threats again, anymore, they all said, you know what, go ahead and kill us. They locked the door, put their guns down, and said, now we know who the true worshipers are. And we're going to start the service now. Imagine, it's easy for us to say, if we ever got to that point where I was told I could not worship Jesus, I would still do it. Again, we overplay our hand sometimes. And we have to ask ourselves, Peter was very confident. And he wasn't playing a game. He really thought that's where his heart was. But Jesus said, tonight, 3 times you're going to deny me. Peter's like, I would die for you. And he meant it, and he believed it. But what he didn't realize is that Jesus saw a crack in his character that Jesus needed to address. And he didn't even know it was there. Sometimes we don't know it's in our lives. And yet Jesus wants to address it in our lives. Can we pledge our allegiance to him? So he says to him, if I die, I will not deny thee. And then they go to Gethsemane, and he couldn't even stay awake, right? Flip over, if you would. We know the scene. Just a couple more verses. Down to verse number, I think it's 62, 66. We know the scene. He prays, they fall asleep, comes back. That wasn't denial. But Judas shows up with the soldiers. Peter pledges his allegiance, right? He's ready to fight. He tries to take off the guy's head. The guy ducks. He cuts off his ear. Jesus puts it back and he said, not yet. It's not time. Jesus then is led away. Everybody scatters, like Jesus said they would. You're all going to be offended tonight. You're going to scatter. They did. What happened to John? John follows. John knew the high priest. John actually was able to go into where they're interviewing Jesus. Peter doesn't have that relationship. Peter's outside, looking in, watching. The guards are there, other people standing around, a little fire, warming themselves. Peter's watching and listening and trying to find out. In verse 66, it says this, and as Peter was beneath in the palace, there cometh one of the maids of the high priest, and when she saw Peter warming himself, she looked upon him and said, Art, and thou wast also with Jesus of Nazareth. But he denied, saying, I know not, neither understand what thou sayest. And he went out into the porch, and the cock crew. And the maid saw him again and began to say to them that stood by, this is one of them. And he denied it again. And a little later, they that stood by said again to Peter, surely thou art one of them, for thou art a Galilean, and thy speech agreeth thereto. You sound like him. You're from Galilee. You look familiar. You talk like the Galileans from up north there. I'm pretty sure. I think you're with him. In essence, would you pledge your allegiance to that guy? Look at verse 70. 71. But he began to curse and to swear, saying, I know not this man of whom ye speak. And the second time the cock crew, and Peter called to mind the word that Jesus said unto him, before the cock crow twice, thou shalt deny me thrice. And when he thought thereon, he wept. One of the other gospels says he wept bitterly. He was despondent at what he had done, because he knew at that moment, Jesus told me tonight I was going to deny him 3 times. I told him I would die for him. 3 times I was asked, do you know him? And I said, no. In fact, they said, you sound like him, you talk like him, you sound like you're a Galilean. I think you're with him. And so to make sure that they didn't catch on, he did something that he didn't typically do. He started cursing and swearing. To which they're like, oh yeah, a follower of Jesus wouldn't curse and swear like that. Which is a good reminder that we've got to guard our speech, right? But he got out of it. He saved his neck. But in the process, he was no longer pledging allegiance to Jesus. He was pledging allegiance to his own safety. Go to John 21. This is where we'll spend most of the time, or at least the rest of the time. Again, Peter overestimated his faithfulness to God and underestimated the unfaithfulness of other people, of whether they would stay committed to God or not. And he thought he was the most committed one, and probably because he was part of the inner core. The three, Peter, James, and John. Peter was often the spokesman, the mouthpiece for the disciples, and maybe he just put too much pressure on himself to think that I have to be the one that stands most faithful. For whatever it was, he overplayed his hand. And I don't think probably anybody here today is on the verge of throwing in the towel to the point where you say, I will never serve God again after today. And we came today because we're like, I go to church because I'm committed to Jesus. I pledge my allegiance. That's why I serve him. That's why I live for him. That's why I read my Bible. That's why I pray. That's why I help other people. Because I'm a follower. I'm a disciple of Jesus. I would never deny him. And yet sometimes we practically do. John 21, we see Peter's restored allegiance here. After these things, Jesus showed himself again to the disciples on the Sea of Tiberias, and on this wise showed himself. So he's going to meet with them again. They were together, Simon, Peter, and Thomas called Didymus, and Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, and the sons of Zebedee, and two other of his disciples. Simon Peter saith unto them, I go a-fishing. They say unto him, we also go with thee. They went forth and entered into a ship immediately, and that night they caught nothing. I'll pause there for a minute. There's a lot of debate on what's going on here. Peter and the other disciples, they're despondent. Jesus has died. He rose again. He met with them, then he left, and they're not sure what's happening. Their plan, their vision of setting up this kingdom of God, it's like, well, it's not looking the way we thought it was going to look. They would often go from town to town, and people would give them money for the ministry, for the service, what they're doing for this coming kingdom, and to support Jesus and his ministry. Well, Jesus has died and gone back to heaven in their minds, and they're like, nobody wants to support us now. And so Peter said to the other guys, maybe finances are getting tough, and he's like, I'm going back fishing. Some think he was saying, I'm done with Jesus and going back fishing. I don't think that was his heart. I think his heart was, we need something to eat. Nobody's giving us money. I don't know what Jesus' plan is, but we're going to go fishing. And the others are like, we're going too. That's what they knew how to do, and so they're going fishing. So they go out, and, a bunch of them who are experienced fishermen, they're out there, they're fishing all night, they're doing everything right. And I don't think they're to the point where they're saying, you know what, I've given up on God. I think in their minds, they're just thinking, I don't know what the plan is. So we're going fishing. They knew this. Jesus had told them, I want to meet you in Galilee. I'm going to see you again, so I'll meet you. So that's where they're at, which is their hometown. This is where they're living, and they're right by the sea, and they're fishing. Verse number 4 says this, but when the morning was now come, Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples knew not that it was Jesus. Then Jesus saith unto them, children, have you any meat? They answered him, no. And he said to them, cast the net on the right side of the ship, and you shall find. They cast therefore, and now they were not able to draw it for the multitude of fishes. Interesting. They just fished all night. Now, these guys were very well adapted to fishing. In that area, on that lake, they knew what they were doing. They had spent all night. Now, it's one thing to get skunked with a rod and reel, but for experienced fishermen to get skunked with a net, like totally skunked, they caught nothing. No doubt they brought it up at times, like there's got to be something. There was nothing. You know why there was nothing in the nets? Because God had somehow told every one of those fish, don't go in that net. Like the creator of the universe can explain that to fish, and every one of them avoided that net. It was a miraculous thing. And so too, they're discouraged. And the last thing you want to do to somebody who's discouraged, who's worked all night at doing something, the last thing you want to do is see somebody on the shore saying, "Hey, did you catch anything?" And they said, "No, nothing." To which he responds, they don't know it's Jesus, to which he responds, "Why don't you try putting the net on the other side of the boat?" To which you're like, it's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Like, what would 20 feet matter? Like, who cares? But these guys, not knowing it's Jesus, they're like, "We'll try it." And they put the note on the other, or the net on the other side, and as soon as they did, Jesus told all the fish, "Get in there." And there were so many that they couldn't even bring it up. And they knew. John's like, "Wait a minute. How'd that happen?" And he looked back and he's like, "That's Jesus." He said, "Peter, that's Jesus." He said, "No way." And look at verse 7. Therefore the disciple whom Jesus loved said unto Peter, "It's the Lord." Now when Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he girt his fisher's coat unto him, for he was naked, and he did cast himself into the sea. He wasn't fully naked. He just had stripped down for work. And the other disciples came in a little ship, for they were not far from the land, but as it were 200 cubits, dragging the net with fishes. And as soon as they were come to land, they saw a fire of coals thereon, and fish lay thereon, and bread. Jesus said to them, "Bring the fish which you have now caught." Simon Peter went up and drew the net to the land full of great fishes, 153. And for all there were so many, yet the net was not the net broken. Jesus said to him, "Come and dine." And none of the disciples durst ask him, "Who art thou?" knowing that it was the Lord. And so Peter and the other disciples, they're out in the boat and they're not cursing God. No doubt they're probably all night long at some point, they're probably saying, "Lord, could you please give us some fish?" They're praying, they're asking God for help. They're still serving God, but they just don't know what their next moves are. And then when they see Jesus, and he gives them these fish, and Peter swims to the shore, and he sees Jesus, gives them a hug, no doubt, and excited, and then Peter goes back and helps pull the net to the shore, and like every good fisherman, he counted them, 153, and every one of them was this big, right? It's like, yes. They looked at that and looked so excited about what they did, and did you notice where Jesus was? He's up flipping the own fish he's already got on the coals. Where did he get his fish? He didn't have a rod. You know? He probably just walked out and said, "Hey." And one just popped up and he put it on the fire. Because he's God. He can do anything. And his whole plan was here. The whole reason for this event was to talk to Peter, encourage the others, but to talk to Peter and to restore his allegiance. Because the last time he had saw Peter is when Peter denied him 3 times, the cock crew, and it tells us in another gospel that Jesus turned and looked at Peter. And it wasn't, I don't think it was a judgmental look. I think it was a tender, compassionate look. Like, "Peter, it's going to be okay. I told you this was going to happen. You know, I'm not surprised. I knew this." And so he wants to make things right with Peter. Because Peter has a lot of work to do. Peter doesn't know it, but there's a lot of work to do. He's going to start this church, and he's going to need Peter. He's going to need the other disciples. He's got a lot of things going on. The plan of God was not dead with the crucifixion. It's just beginning. And so he needed Peter's mindset to get right again. And so as they eat, verse number 15 says this, "So when they had dined, Jesus saith to Simon Peter, Simon, son of Jonas, and he used the word agape. Do you love me with an agape, self-sacrificing type of love? And he said, do you have the agape love more than these? We don't know what he meant by more than these. Probably more than these other men that you one day said that they might turn their back, but I never will. Do you have that type of love for me? Maybe he was saying, do you love me more than fishing? Remember I called you before out of fishing. This was a nice day you had. You just had a big catch, but this is not my plan for you the rest of your life. Do you love me more than that? And he said unto him, yes, Lord. You know that I have Philadelphia love for you. You know I have brotherly love for you. We don't see it in English, but that's the Greek underlying it. And he said, okay, feed my lambs. He said it again the second time, Simon, son of Jonas, do you have agape love for me? He saith unto him, yea, Lord, thou knowest that I have Philadelphia love for you. He said, okay, feed my sheep. He saith unto him the third time, Simon, son of Jonas, do you have Philadelphia love for me? Peter is grieved because he said unto him the third time, do you have Philadelphia love for me? And he said unto him, Lord, thou knowest all things. Thou knowest that I have Philadelphia love for you. Jesus saith unto him, feed my sheep. What's Jesus doing here? Well, remember how many times Peter denied him? 3 times? He wanted to get Peter to understand, listen, 3 times I'm going to forgive you. I don't need to forgive you once, but for your sake, I need you to hear me, Peter. I forgive you. And I want you to get back to serving me. I want you to get to the point where you're willing to say, like you did before, I pledge my allegiance to Jesus Christ. No turning back. And I know it's going to be hard because there's always going to be that thing in the back of your head that is saying, you failed me before. You're not going to do it this time. And he's like, listen, forget the past. We can't change the past. Forget the past. And Peter, what I want you to do is follow me. He goes on. Verse number 18, he said this, I know this about you, Peter. Verily, verily, I say to you, when you were young, you used to dress yourself. You used to walk wherever you wanted to, he says. But when you are going to be old, thou shalt stretch forth thy hands, and another shall gird thee and carry thee whither thou wouldest not. This spake he, signifying by what death he should glorify God. And when he had spoken this, he said unto him, follow me. And if you've ever failed God, that thing stays in the back of your head constantly, right? How's he ever going to use me? How's he ever going to use me? And God is a God of forgiveness. God is a God of grace. And God said to Peter, listen, Peter, let me tell you this. I don't tell this to everybody, but I know what's going to happen to you. When you were young, you used to do whatever you wanted. But there's coming a day, Peter, when somebody else is going to take you and they're going to gird you and they're going to put you someplace you don't want to go. And he told him this about the fact that one day he was going to die. History tells us that Peter was crucified on a cross, just like Jesus. But when they went to do it, when they went to crucify him, Peter said, I'm not worthy to be crucified like my Lord. He said, put me upside down. And history says they did that. And his heart was that he was going to follow God to the end of his life. And what a commitment, what faithfulness. And he said, so you know what I want you to do? I know what's going to happen down the road, Peter. You're going to die for me. So I'm thankful for that. But don't get things stuck in your head. Follow me today. Don't worry about what you did yesterday. Follow me today. Be my disciple. Be my apprentice. Be one who just walks in my footsteps. So as they're walking, he says, what's going to happen to John? And he said, who cares? I know what's going to happen to John. It doesn't matter what's going to happen. I want you to follow me. Look at verse 22. Jesus said, if I will that he tarry till I come, what is that to you? Forget it, Peter. Follow me. He said, I don't care if everybody else turns their back on me. I don't care if everybody else gets to live to see the resurrection, or lives to see the kingdom. It's none of your business, Peter. What did I ask you to do? I asked you to follow me. And then Peter spread the rumor, John gets to live to see the kingdom. That's not what Jesus said. He just said, it doesn't matter what anybody else gets to do. He said, Peter, will you do me a favor? Will you put your hand on your heart and pledge your allegiance to me? Will you follow me? Will you put me first? Will you seek my kingdom as a priority in your life? And the great news is Peter did. We know the rest of the story with Peter. Begins the church, and God fills him and does great things, and amazing things happen in his life. But God was asking him, Peter, will you pledge that you're going to be faithful to me? And here's what we all probably have done at some point in our life. We probably all look back to a time, hopefully, when we first said, I realize I'm a sinner heading toward hell. And the only one that can save me is Jesus Christ. And I hope there's a point in your life when you look back and you say, there is no doubt in my mind I'm going to heaven because I have turned from my sin and I have decided to follow Jesus. And for you, maybe that was when you were 8 years old or 15 years old or 30 years old, whenever it was. But from that point on, there's been times in your life where you've blown it. And you're like, man, how did I get here? And you recommitted and you rebooted, so to speak. And you said, you know what? I need to pledge again. I'm going to follow Jesus. You got your heart right and you're faithfully serving him. And maybe there's been a couple of those moments in your life. Could I encourage you, not to wait till you fall, but maybe we could do something like this. Most of us get up and like a good cup of coffee, start the day. Maybe you have a good cup of tea, or maybe you don't like either one of those. Whatever you do to start your day, I love a good cup of coffee. And maybe when we take that cup of coffee and get it ready, we could thank the Lord for who he is, for what he's done, and say, Lord, today I'm pledging my allegiance to you. And just have a marker in your life that every day, you know what, Lord? Today's about you. That song we sang came from, I was going to share it earlier, I never did. It came from Psalm 115. It was ironic, I didn't even think about it. It was just a song that, I saw and was phenomenal. But my devotions this morning, I was reading Psalm 115, and it said this, not unto us, O Lord, not unto us, but unto thy name give glory, for thy mercy and for thy truth's sake. It's just because it talks about some of the words that are in that song. It came from Psalm 115. And again, the glory, why are we here, what our life is all about, it's all about him. Not just on Sundays for a couple of hours. That should be our priority, right? But every day of my life. My life is, because I'm a child of God, because I've been called to follow him, I should be doing that every single day. And every single day, he should be my priority. It's why we're here. In fact, when Jesus told the disciples there, the last thing he says as he leaves them, he gives them the mission. In fact, it was more than a mission, it was a co-mission. And as he told them, I have all power. I know when you watch the news, it doesn't look like he has all power. But God still has all power. And God still wants to lead people to himself. And God says this, my mission is for you, my child, to be a disciple of me. I want you to follow me. And as you follow me, I want you to make disciples. That's the Great Commission. That's what he's called us to do. And so if I would say to Jesus, I am still pledging my allegiance to you, my mission is the same that Peter's was. Peter's gone. The disciples there, they're all gone. A lot of people that we used to know that used to serve God and used to be part of the mission, they're gone. But I'm still here, and you're still here. And the mission is to tell others about Jesus Christ. Follow him. Live for him. Serve him. But pray that God will give us opportunities to talk to people about Jesus Christ. That's why we're here. And when that mission is over for you, he'll call you home. But till then, as long as we have breath, that's part of the mission. So may we ask God to help us this week to continue to follow him. May we grab our coffee every morning, and before we take a sip and thank him for it to start our day, may we repledge our allegiance. I'm going to follow you. I'm going to put my heart and soul into this mission that you've called me to be, to do, to serve. And then ask him to help you to talk to somebody about Jesus Christ this week, to live it, to speak it, to show people what a Christian ought to look like. And may God use us till he comes.